Okay, it's clear. The anatomy of evil comes at this huge, complex subject with a very... Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to getting informed. We tackle a stack of sources, find the key insights, and give you the surprising stuff with, well, just enough context to keep it interesting. Today, we're getting into something pretty deep, maybe a bit uncomfortable. It's about human nature, really. What's behind some of history's absolute darkest moments? Is it just circumstances? Or is something else going on, like a deliberate decision? We're unpacking the anatomy of evil, a historical examination, and this book, it doesn't just list bad things, it really tries to get into the why.
Right. So our mission here for this deep dive is to pull out the most, well, profound and frankly unsettling ideas from this look at history's worst figures. We're talking everyone from, ancient tyrants all the way up to modern criminal groups. We want to understand those recurring patterns of evil, where it comes from, and importantly, how people have dealt with it, or maybe how they've enabled it across different times, different cultures. It's about seeing those threads, the ones connecting these acts of cruelty throughout history.
And what really stands out from the sources we looked at for this is how the book doesn't just leave this stuff in the past. It draws direct lines, connects these historical things right to issues we're dealing with today. So it's not just looking back. It makes these insights feel super relevant to you right here, right now, as you're sort of navigating today's world. Okay, so the first big thing the book tackles, and it's a tough one, is whether evil is just, like, unavoidable, part of being human, or maybe just a grim accident of history. Or is it something much more intentional?
Yeah.
The book takes a pretty clear stance here. It argues evil isn't just bad luck or bad circumstances. It presents it as a conscious choice. That's a bold claim, isn't it?
It really is.
For a lot of people, I imagine, boiling down huge historical horrors, just a conscious choice might feel a bit simplistic, maybe. Like, what about the big structures, societal pressures, or even, in individual psychology, things we usually consider? How does the book handle that?
That's a great place to start, because it gets right to the heart of the book's main and most challenging point. The real kind of aha moment, if you can call it that, is this insistence that evil isn't just some historical accident or bad situation. It's not something that just happens to us or takes people over. No, it argues it's a conscious, often repeated choice.
Okay.
It totally flips the script, right? From bad things happen to people choose to do bad things. The authors are basically saying that being evil, it's not passive. It's not just reacting to pressure. It involves deliberate decisions. Made by individuals, yes, but sometimes whole societies seem to make these choices. Choices to harm, to oppress, maybe just to neglect others. Now, it doesn't completely ignore things like environment or structure.
Right.
But the focus, it's squarely on agency. The idea that these actions come from intent, a willed decision to cause suffering. And that distinction, it's powerful, maybe unsettling, because it puts the responsibility right on the person or the group making the choice.
That's sobering, thinking about individual choice like that. But what's maybe even more striking is how the book shows these choices aren't just one-offs. They're presented as threads in this huge historical tapestry. You see these patterns repeating across totally different times, different places.
Exactly.
So it's not just a list of bad actors. It's a study of how these things keep happening. It sounds like the book really connects the dots across centuries.
Absolutely. And when you start looking at these figures side by side, you see these universal themes popping up again and again. What makes seeing these patterns so, insightful is the kind of chilling predictability it shows. How certain human weaknesses, like our need for certainty or our tribal thinking, or how easily we can dehumanize others, they get weaponized.
Consistentized by those in power.
By those in power, yes, regardless of the era. So for instance, you see the corrupting effect of power when it's completely unchecked, or how really deeply held ideologies, or sometimes just personal issues like extreme narcissism, or that lack of empathy you see in psychopathy, or intense paranoia, how these can fuel just unbelievable cruelty. The book also points out how certain systems, whether they're political, social, economic, can be set up in ways that basically allow evil to stick around, even thrive.
Right.
So by looking at these patterns, you, the listener, start to see the common ground, the shared human stuff, and the societal structures that show up across thousands of years. It gives you a way to understand events that might seem totally unrelated at first glance.
Okay, so to make this less abstract, the book gives us this gallery of figures.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly diverse and honestly pretty unsettling. And it's important, like you said, to see them not just as isolated monsters, but as examples of that bigger pattern we were just talking about. I mean, the range here is just staggering.
Yeah.
You've got ancient emperors like Caligula, right? Whose personal whims could wreck thousands of lives. Then jump forward to the systemic cruelty of, say, 19th century robber barons, where economic power crushed people, and then all the way to modern drug cartels. It's vast.
It is.
The book mentions historical giants of terror, like Genghis Khan, the Roman Emperor Caligula from antiquity. Then you move into monarchies. Early modern times, you get figures like Henry VIII being analyzed. And then it broadens out even more, looking at systemic economic cruelty, 19th century slave traders, the robber barons.
Right, those industrialists.
Yeah, for anyone maybe not familiar, we're talking figures like, say, Vanderbilt or Carnegie, men who built these huge empires, sure, but often through really ruthless tactics, crushing competition, terrible labor conditions, wielding massive political influence, essentially creating systems of cruelty that, in a way, echo those ancient tyrants.
A different form, same pattern, perhaps.
Exactly. And then, of course, the 20th century gives us that grim list of dictators: Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Ayatollah Khomeini.
A terrible century for it.
But it doesn't stop there, does it? It brings it right up to the present, mentioning contemporary figures like Vladimir Putin and even modern criminal groups like the Mexican drug cartels. That's a huge historical span. How does the book even manage to tie these seemingly very different actors together?
Well, that's kind of the book's core strength, maybe, or its most chilling point. What's really fascinating is how it analyzes this incredibly varied group. Despite the totally different times, cultures, settings, the book keeps coming back to its main arguments: evil as a choice and those recurring patterns.
Okay, can you give an example?
Sure. So it might draw a line directly between the kind of absolute unchecked power of a Roman emperor like Caligula, leading to just arbitrary cruelty, and the sort of insulated authoritarian control used by a modern dictator like Putin, which results in widespread oppression. The historical details, vastly different, obviously,
Yes.
but the mechanisms, how power is gathered, how it's used, how it corrupts the person wielding it, the book argues those are strikingly similar.
Huh.
Or think about a slave trader. Okay, their immediate context is economic gain, exploitation, but their choice to dehumanize people, to inflict suffering. The book argues that aligns with the choices made by dictators driven by ideology. It helps you, the listener, see past the specific historical moment and grab onto the shared human elements driving these dark actions across centuries.
That really reframes things. It's not just about what kind of evil, but the underlying choices and power dynamics that let it happen. Which I guess leads us to another really critical point the book makes, and maybe an uncomfortable one too. The huge impact of just doing nothing.
Yeah.
It makes you think beyond the big historical figures to just everyday moments almost.
Yes. This is a claim that comes up again and again, and it's maybe one of the most unsettling takeaways. The book basically argues that evil often gets its foothold because good people choose inaction. They look away, they stay quiet, they just don't get involved. And this inaction, the book says, creates the perfect environment for evil to take root, to grow, to flourish. It suggests that even small failures to act in our own lives can contribute to a broader tolerance for cruelty.
Wow.
It makes a really strong case for moral responsibility, not just to, read about history, but to actively confront injustice and cruelty when we see it. It's a powerful call, really, for personal accountability, societal accountability, arguing that silence, that's not neutral. It often works as an endorsement.
That is a heavy thought.
Yeah.
Definitely makes you question your own responses, doesn't it? Big or small. So given all these historical accounts out there, what makes this particular book different? What's its unique angle compared to other histories of bad events or figures? What goes beyond just listing atrocities?
Well, it certainly does more than just list atrocities, which, many historical accounts focus on the what. Its real distinctive strength, I think, is its relentless effort to dig into the why. Why did these individuals become murderous or cruel or tyrannical? It tries to understand the motivations, the thinking, the ideologies, the deliberate choices behind what they did, rather than just describing the awful outcomes.
Okay, getting behind the actions.
Exactly. But beyond that, maybe even more significantly, it actively connects that past evil to things happening now. By bringing in contemporary criminals, political figures, it kind of breaks down that wall between then and now.
Right. It's not just history class.
Precisely. It makes sure the lessons feel urgent, relevant right now, not just like some academic exercise about the past. It doesn't let you easily compartmentalize evil as something that only happened back then. It makes the whole thing resonate with your world today, prompting you to see these same patterns possibly unfolding around you.
Okay, it's clear. The anatomy of evil comes at this huge, complex subject with a very specific approach, a distinct framework. And like any big analytical work, especially on something this sensitive, it naturally makes you want to look closer at its methods, maybe its built-in assumptions. It's important for you, listening, to get that balanced perspective.
Exactly. And the sources we looked at do point this out. Because the book uses such a strong moral framing specifically, drawing heavily on a Judeo-Christian moral framework.
Okay.
Emphasizing things like individual free will, sin as a deliberate wrong choice, a pretty clear good versus evil binary. Because of that, some arguments might feel less like objective historical analysis and more like a moral judgment.
Nice.
So, for example, really complex historical factors, economic pressures, social upheaval, political context might sometimes get a bit downplayed in favor of driving home these moral lessons. The interpretation might lean towards a specific moral conclusion.
Makes sense.
And just building on that, the assumptions that come with that specific Judeo-Christian structure, well, they might not click with everyone listening. Or they might even feel a bit prescriptive, depending on your own worldview.
Sure.
Understanding these different viewpoints is really key if you want to do a thorough deep dive like this. It lets you appreciate what the book offers, its insights, without necessarily having to buy into its entire worldview. It helps you, the listener, form a more complete, more nuanced picture. It's about seeing the lens the authors are using.
Right, understanding the perspective. Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive into the anatomy of evil, let's just quickly recap the main takeaways for you. We've explored this really profound, maybe challenging argument that evil isn't just circumstance, but a conscious choice.
The element of agency.
Exactly. We've seen these unsettling historical patterns emerge, connecting vastly different figures and times ancient emperors, modern criminals, through these common threads of power, ideology, dehumanization.
Those recurring themes, yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about that critical role of action, or often the painful lack of it, in action in confronting evil. Ultimately, the book really pushes to understand the why behind these horrific acts, not just settle for knowing what happened.
And if we try to connect all this to the bigger picture, this understanding of historical evil, its patterns, its origins, how it's allowed to flourish, it really forces us, doesn't it? Forces us to think about our own responsibilities, our own vigilance right now, today. Which raises, I think, an important question for you listening to maybe ponder, to explore a bit more. If we recognize these historical patterns, how might that empower us to act differently? Or maybe just prevent inaction when we face choices today that kind of echo the past? What small acts, maybe just awareness, even could disrupt these patterns before they get worse?
That's a powerful thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the anatomy of evil. We hope it gives you a lot to consider and maybe encourages a closer look at your own part in this ongoing story of human choice.
Grab Confronting Evil by Bill O'Reilly now on sale for $21.95. Don't miss this chance to build good habit and achieve remarkable results. Buy now, today.
Like and subscribe for more Bookhaven podcasts.